Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my channel, Kindred Souls of Brooklyn. And folks, today I want to do a little bit of a different video, and one that concerns why I think Brooklyn is one of the most haunted places in America. Now, it's kind of interesting, and I'm going to bring out some different topics as to why, different topics, different reasons, different things that people don't know about Brooklyn. I mean, I lived in Brooklyn almost my entire life, and we owned a card store in Brooklyn, and so got to hear a lot of amazing things. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed the video. And of course, if you guys have any great stories, I'd love to hear about them. Drop them in the comment box. Stay tuned. All right, so first off, like I was telling you, my family and I owned a card store at 236 Prospect Park West for over 25 years, the Hallmark Gold Crown store. And we're neighborhood people. So when you have a business in the neighborhood, you know, obviously we have a rapport with the people who come in, with the people of the neighborhood. And you're kind of like, I guess, a bartender in a way. I mean, there were people who came in who we did invitations for them from the child's baptism all the way through the child's wedding. And so you build up a certain rapport, and plus you also have kind of like an open forum. I mean, not that we said anything crazy in there or anything like that, but the point is that it's your own store, and you could, you know, play Christmas music when you want to. You could say Merry Christmas. I mean, there's no rules, corporate rules as to, you know, things like you can't say. So we would have these conversations in the store, and typically people would come in, people we knew, even people we didn't know who were, say, bus drivers or whatever, and they would hear our conversations. And we just talked about UFOs, and we talk about all kinds of topics. And one of the topics we talked about was ghosts, and ghosts or spirits or whatever. And as we'd be talking about things, people would come in and they would tell us various stories that, you know, I'll tell you one or two in this video. But before I do that, I just want to bring out some reasons as to why Brooklyn is probably one of the most haunted places in America, and why people don't realize it. So a lot of people don't realize that funeral parlors were actually a pretty late innovation. I mean, from having my mom and my dad, who were World War II generation, they would tell us stories. I mean, back in the older days, you know, the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, like then, rich people could only afford funeral parlors. The poor people or the middle-class people couldn't afford funeral parlors back then. So typically, most of the time, when there was a wake, what they would do is they would put the casket right in the front of the house. Now again, people who own like the brownstone houses, or people who own like the houses that were built like in 1918, like my father owned a house like that. Generally, if you look in the front of that house, some people say, well, why are the radiators built in such a way? Why is there a radiator on the far right and a radiator on the far left? And the reason for that is they typically kept the middle open. It was built like that on purpose. They would put the casket right in the middle, and the family would come in, and that's how it was done. Now, I'd never seen that in my life. I'm 55 years old, but where I did see that was going to Catholic school for the first 12 years of my life. Anytime there was a brother or a nun or a priest who had passed away, a lot of times they would wake them out in the church or in the high school, Bishop Ford High School they had gone to. And I didn't see that too often in Ford. Saw it more in Holy Name of Jesus, where they waked a few folks up there. And it was kind of the same kind of thing. So that's a very good reason. So if you're saying, why would there be spirits around? Why would there be something going on? That's a possible reason as well. But again, a lot of people who might be watching might say to yourself, well, you know, I haven't heard any ghost stories, haven't heard anything about spirits or whatever. Now, my personal opinion is my son passed on a year and a half ago. And so I have not felt anything. I mean, I feel him with me all the time, but I haven't had any kind of like visitation or whatever. But I also think I really try to keep myself in the light, and I feel like my son really is my guardian angel now. So I really feel a protection around me. So when I do feel kind of something, I do kind of pull back from it. But a lot of people, you got to realize, you know, in the case of, say, my father's house, I mean, he bought the house maybe for $30,000, $40,000. I mean, now houses like that are worth 1.5 million, 2 million, 3 million. So correct me if I'm wrong, anybody out there who's in the real estate market, I don't think in New York that you have to tell people that a house has a haunting or whatever. There are some places where you do have to disclose that, but I don't think if it's a haunting situation, you have to disclose that. And obviously, if someone's house is worth a couple $1 million and they're going to put it on the market, they're going to leave that detail out for sure. And not only do I think that Brooklyn is probably one of the most active is a word that people like to use for hauntings. The reason why also, now again, we had the store up in Prospect Park West. I went to Bishop Ford Central Catholic High School. You have to realize, in the case of Bishop Ford, first off, it sits right next to Greenwood Cemetery, and Greenwood Cemetery itself is literally the third largest cemetery in the world. People don't realize this. There's over 600,000 people buried in Greenwood Cemetery. Another word for Greenwood Cemetery is the city of the dead, because it's literally a city. It's got so many people in it. And now with COVID and all the stuff that's going on, it's growing day by day. And it's literally a city. So if there's ever going to be any activity near something, you have to realize that's a very big active part. And a lot of people come to visit it. There's a lot of famous graves in there. So it's a very active place. Another factor, I would tend to argue that probably the most haunted area of Brooklyn is probably from Greenwood Cemetery through the Gowanus. And another reason for this, I would say, is the Battle for Brooklyn. The Battle for Brooklyn took place in and around Greenwood Cemetery, Prospect Park. You also have the situation of what they call the Maryland 400. These were the guys who stayed behind to hold off the British long enough for George Washington to escape. Now, nobody knows where the Maryland 400 are buried. They assume they're buried somewhere between 3rd Avenue, kind of near the Whole Foods on 3rd Avenue, down near the, down that by that whole area, 3rd Avenue, and like 2nd Street, 3rd Street. No one really knows. They're still looking for them. Some people think they're in a VA post on 3rd Avenue, like near 9th Street, near St. Thomas Aquinas Church. Nobody really knows, but any place that's really old, any place that had battles, tends to be a very active area. One thing that I found very interesting about working in my store and talking to certain people is, obviously you meet a lot of people when you have a store, and some people come in and some people like to tell tales and some people like to embellish on things, but then you have other people, namely people who served in the military for 30 or 40 years and people who really aren't going to come out and tell you things that they've experienced. Now, I've known a number of people like that, and I'll tell you one story from a person I know very, very well. And this is a man a no-nonsense man who literally spent, I believe it's 35 years in the 101st Airborne. And this is a guy he was in Korea, he was in Vietnam, he's seen a lot of action, no-nonsense guy. And him and his family own a considerable amount of property for Brooklyn. Usually in Brooklyn you have the house and you have the backyard like we did. But he owns a considerable amount of property where his grandfather had actually built a house, and he also built some extra things in the back of the house. And he would tell me on a number of occasions that the original guy who built the house, let's just call him Ted, Ted had built this house back in like the 1920s, and then this guy's grandfather had bought it. And it seemed that when this older guy, Ted, had passed away, it seemed like he basically stayed there. His spirit stayed there. And he particularly liked to stay, and there was like an extra house that they built kind of behind the main house. Now, when this guy grew up, they never really utilized that room because they felt that, it was, not that Ted ever did anything wrong, but Ted would he'd mess with the electric. When they mentioned his name, there would be activity, there would be things moving around, they'd hear different things going on. And again, like I said, this is a no-nonsense guy. These kind of guys don't tend to say stuff like that and believe in stuff like this unless they're saying something that's true. So basically, this guy ended up moving out of that house eventually. He got married and ended up, his son ended up moving in there. So this guy who I know, his grandson said to himself, the grandson was about 16 years old, and he said, this is baloney. I'm 16, I want to have my own room. I want to go into that room. So the grandson moved into the room, and basically he lasted in there for like about 3 months, because apparently the guy wouldn't do anything wrong to him, but the guy would it was very active. He would move things around, he would hear things moving, he would, there were times that he thought he heard like the wind blowing, and he heard his name in the wind. So here was a 16-year-old kid that after 3 months of, and everybody at that age wants their own room and wants to play their music and do whatever. The kid actually moved out of the room and moved back into the main house. And one more thing concerning Greenwood Cemetery to the Gowanus. Again, I told you I went to Bishop Ford Central Catholic High School. Before Bishop Ford Central Catholic High School was the high school, it actually was a trolley barn. But before it was a trolley barn, what was there was a Civil War prison. So between Greenwood Cemetery being the third largest in the world, a Civil War prison, and then I'm going to throw another factor in on you. You have the Prospect Expressway. Back in the 1950s, and I've done a video on this, back in the 1950s, a lot of people don't realize where the Prospect Expressway goes and cuts through, those were all houses in there. In fact, IHM, Immaculate Heart of Mary, their parish was so much bigger than it is today. And Robert Moses came along, and Robert Moses was notorious for wrecking, like, middle to lower class neighborhoods. And he wasn't big for public transportation. I mean, he loved the automobile, which I love cars too, but he would cut through neighborhoods, and he literally took apart that whole area, and it's what they call public domain. And public domain is basically, or rather eminent domain, I'm sorry. Eminent domain basically says that if a government entity, the state, the city, the government, deems that your property is more important for the public use than it is for you, all they have to do is give you fair market value. And fair market value tends not to be what the value is today. Like, in other words, if you had a house for $1 million today, they might give you $300,000, and you have to get out. There's no choice. So they did that right through the Prospect Expressway, and that's where that is. So you're talking about the battle for Brooklyn, Prospect Expressway situation, Civil War prison at Bishop Ford, third largest cemetery in the world, old houses that had people waked inside of them. It adds up to a lot of different things, and I'm sure there's a lot of other stories out there too. And again, this is just a fun video that I wanted to do, and I like to do these fun videos. And again, like I said, I mean, I'm a believer in God, and I believe that we do move on. I believe that there's another step to this whole existence. I mean, I'm hoping for that, because this way, I'm looking for that because I want to see my son again. I want to yell at him. I want to yell at him, give him a great big hug, and then, of course, yell at him for like 2 seconds and 3 seconds, 5 seconds, and then give him a great big hug again. So I'm hoping for it. But again, this is just a fun video, and I hope you guys, if you guys have any stories, I'd love to hear them. Please drop me a comment. Please let me know, and let me know what you think. So please subscribe. Please share the video if you can. I'd really appreciate it. And we have a suicide prevention foundation. It's called the Waffles Foundation, that we named after my son. And we donate musical instruments to all kids who want to play, to musical programs. You can find us on Venmo, PayPal if you want to donate. We are a legitimate 501c3 foundation. And like I said, we donate musical instruments to kids who love to play. My son was a musician, so Waffles was his nickname. So that's how we ended up getting that name. So until next time, this is Al signing off. See you real soon. And like they say, if you feel cold and you feel, electric moving around and your dog starts howling, whatever, that might be an indication. See you in the next video. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.